Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling one of the most famous and infamous disasters in history, the sinking of the RMS Titanic. It's a story that's really about this incredible piece of engineering, but also about a fatal dose of overconfidence and a night that would change maritime history forever.
So let's start with this quote. It's from Captain Edward Smith, the man who was going to be in charge of the Titanic. This just perfectly sums up the thinking at the time, right? This unshakable belief that, hey, we've built things so well, technology has basically conquered nature.
And then, just 5 years later, he went down with his ship. He and over 1,500 other people lost in the freezing North Atlantic. So yeah, this is way more than a story about a shipwreck. It's about what happens when that kind of supreme confidence just gets completely and tragically shattered.
So what was it about the Titanic that made everyone think she was invincible? Well, she wasn't just a ship. She was basically a floating monument to human achievement.
Okay, so check out this number, 46,328. That's her gross registered tonnage, which is just a fancy way of measuring how much space was inside. To put that in perspective, she was almost 1.5 times bigger than her nearest rivals. Her engines alone were the height of a 4-story building. We're talking about a scale that nobody had ever seen before, a true behemoth.
And the luxury? Oh, it was off the charts. A first-class suite would set you back the equivalent of over $140,000 today for a one-way trip. But you know what's interesting? Even third class was a step up for a lot of passengers. It really was this floating city, a symbol of both incredible wealth and the dream of a better life.
But underneath all that glamour, all that incredible engineering, this masterpiece of technology was just steaming full speed ahead, right towards the danger the crew had tragically underestimated. The stage was absolutely set for a disaster.
So on the very day of the sinking, the Titanic gets not 1, not 2, but at least 6 separate warnings about ice fields right in her path. 6! Think about that. The very last warning from a ship called the SS Californian was incredibly specific, basically saying we're stopped and surrounded by ice. But the Titanic's radio operator, who was swamped sending messages for passengers, essentially told them to shut up. Just unbelievable.
And you'd think after all those warnings, they'd slow down, right? Nope. They kept plowing ahead at about 22 knots, which is pretty close to top speed. Now, that sounds completely reckless to us, but back then, it was just standard procedure. These big ocean liners were in a huge competition to be the fastest, and schedules were everything. Ice warnings were seen more like, hey, just a heads up, rather than danger, slow down. So picture this. It's the middle of the night, the sea is eerily calm, like a sheet of glass, and then the lookouts see it, an iceberg, dead ahead. The order to turn is shouted, but a ship this huge, it doesn't turn on a dime. The steam-powered steering took a whole 30 seconds to even start turning the rudder. And those 30 seconds, that was all it took. It was already too late.
So it wasn't this massive head-on collision like you might think. It was actually a glancing blow. The iceberg basically acted like a giant can opener, scraping along the side of the ship, popping rivets and tearing open a gash below the waterline. Now here's the crucial part. The Titanic was designed to stay afloat if, say, 4 of her watertight compartments flooded. The iceberg damaged 6, and with that, her fate was sealed. It was just a matter of time.
Okay, so the collision itself was the fatal wound. But the absolute catastrophe that followed, that staggering loss of life, well, that was all down to human error, ancient regulations, and a complete lack of preparation.
Imagine this. Less than an hour after hitting the iceberg, the ship's own builder, the man who designed her, Thomas Andrews, he does the math and tells the captain, she's going down. We have about 2 hours. The crew in charge knew it was a mathematical certainty long before most of the passengers had any idea how serious it was.
And this is really the core of the whole tragedy. You've got 2,224 people on the ship, but there are only enough lifeboats for 1,178. Do the math. Before the first lifeboat was even launched, more than 1,000 people had absolutely no chance of survival. They were doomed from the start.
And the craziest part? This wasn't illegal. Not even close. The safety rules were just so hopelessly outdated. They were based on the ship's tonnage, not the number of passengers. In fact, the Titanic actually had more lifeboats than the British Board of Trade legally required. And get this, one of the reasons they didn't have a full row of boats was because it would have blocked the beautiful promenade view for the first-class passengers. A nice view was prioritized over lives.
As if that wasn't bad enough, the evacuation itself was a mess. The order was women and children, right? But the two senior officers in charge of the lifeboats interpreted that simple order in two completely different ways. On one side of the ship, it was women and children only. So lifeboats were being lowered with tons of empty seats because there were no more women around. On the other side, it was women and children first, meaning men could get on if there was room. That simple misunderstanding, that different interpretation, it absolutely cost people their lives.
So now we get to the aftermath and the truly horrifying human cost of all these cascading failures. For everyone left behind as the ship went down, the situation was beyond grim.
The water temperature that night was -2 degrees Celsius. That's below freezing. For the hundreds and hundreds of people thrown into that water, survival wasn't a matter of hours, it was a matter of minutes. Survivors in the lifeboats said the sound of the cries for help across the dark water was something that haunted them for the rest of their days.
And here's a really brutal truth about the disaster. Your odds of survival depended almost entirely on how much you paid for your ticket. Look at the numbers. Almost 2/3 of first-class passengers survived. But in third class, only about a quarter made it. Their cabins were way down in the bottom of the ship, and in all the chaos, many of them just got lost or trapped in a maze of corridors with no way out.
When you look at the final numbers, they are just staggering. More than 1,500 people died. That's 68% of every single person on board. To this day, it's one of the deadliest maritime disasters to ever happen in peacetime. But, out of such an immense, unthinkable tragedy, some good did come. It forced a complete rethink of safety at sea, creating a legacy of regulations that, frankly, protects all of us who travel by ship today.
The public was absolutely furious, and that outrage led to official inquiries in both the US and Britain, and they found a whole chain of failures, right? The regulations were a joke, Captain Smith made some really bad calls, the ship was going way too fast, and then there's the whole mystery of the SS Californian, a ship nearby that saw the distress rockets and just did nothing.
And the result was nothing short of a revolution in maritime safety. Because of the Titanic, new laws were passed. Simple things we take for granted now. Lifeboats for every single person on board? That's because of the Titanic. The International Ice Patrol that monitors icebergs? Titanic. A mandatory 24/7 radio watch for distress calls? Again, Titanic. All of these reforms were bundled into something called the Solis Convention. And they are the direct, powerful legacy of the 1,500 people who died.
Which brings us to a final thought, a question for all of us, really. The Titanic was the absolute peak of technology for its time. People truly believed it was unsinkable. So now, over a century later, with our own technology advancing faster than we can even keep up with, are we sure we've learned the lesson? Are we still in danger of that same kind of hubris, that same overconfidence in the face of nature?